Hey everyone, I am starting this month's plant walk with an eastern white pine. Very excited to talk about pine. I'm going to be doing even more short videos than usual because my phone's been acting up and I don't want to lose anything. So we'll go ahead and start with the pine. Pine is a species that grows absolutely everywhere. It is incredibly medicinal. In fact, all parts are used. We use the inner bark, we use the pine tips, the needles, the catkins, we use the pollen that it produces, we use the sap, and it's incredibly medicinal in all of those parts. Pine is also used as a food, and I will be working on getting together my own version of a pine monograph that's got a couple recipes for a few different things. We really like to make a pine pollen butter and pine tip cornbread, and it's really good. So right now we're in spring, and unfortunately I did miss pine pollen season because it rained, and as soon as you get heavy rainfall, that pollen is done for. Pollen is a super light, powdery, fluffy substance, so when it just gets soaked after soaked after soaked, it's just completely gone. So as you can see here, these are the catkins. And these are technically what's called the male part of the plant. This will produce the cone, and this is what produces the pollen. Pine pollen is incredible because it produces at very high amounts. When it produces it, there is a sea of yellow powder under the tree. It's really beautiful. It is literally like holding sunshine. And as we know, pine is full of vitamin C. You can taste it as soon as you bite into a needle, especially the pine tips, which I want to show you one of these big pine tips. Let me grab one for you. So this right here is what we would call the pine tip. This is the new growth, and when you hear about people drinking pine or spruce tip tea, this is technically what you want. Of course, you know, without these, we could use just the needles and consider that, you know, the newest growth, but they're not going to have quite the flavor that these pine tips have. When you bite into one of these bright green tips, it is sticky, juicy, very tannin rich, acidic, astringent, and that's a flavor that you should really get used to because there are quite a few plants that have that. In fact, I really want to go over both raspberry and blackberry, and both of those are astringent plants where you can bite in and taste those like bitter astringent components, and that's a really good flavor to know because then when you're out wildcrafting and trying to get to know plants, you could take a little nibble and that would be a really good indicator of the plant's medicinal properties. So good. So what I really wanted to talk about was pine pollen, and hopefully you guys in other regions where it's not already summer, you might be getting a spring, might not have gotten pine pollen season yet, or maybe you're still in the middle of it. So pine pollen is, in my opinion, for sure the strongest medicinal part of this plant. Pine pollen is, let me see if I can say all the things: anti-inflammatory, androgen rich, antioxidant rich, I'm not going to be able to remember all the things. It is incredibly rich in vitamin C. It is, I'm not going to be able to remember all these things, but I will say this will help paint a picture, and I will do that monograph. I compare it in my mind mentally to ginseng. Ginseng is considered like a vitality tonic, and that is for sure what pine pollen is. We do consider pine pollen to be more of a masculine, male, testosterone desiring people driven medicinal. And that reason is because it has androgens in it. It has DHEA and testosterone. So when you ingest and you take pine pollen, this is crazy, within seconds of ingesting pine pollen, your testosterone and DHEA levels are increased. And so pine pollen is similar to cordyceps mushroom in that as soon as you take it, you can feel it surge throughout your body, and you have more energy. And so it's similar to ginseng in that way, where it's strong, it's powerful, we can feel it, it's increasing our energy levels, it's protecting certain systems of the body with its antioxidant properties. Another really interesting thing about pine pollen being an anti-inflammatory is that it also has properties that make it to where you feel less pain. So it's incredible for pain relief. This is a tonic herb. So if you're taking it for its antioxidant or anti-inflammatory properties, it's something that you can and want to take on a regular basis. And luckily the pine pollen is really easy to incorporate into foods, drinks, tinctures. So there's lots of ways you can get it in there. It's pretty flavorless if you want to add it to smoothies, foods, sprinkle it on things, maybe make a seasoning blend with it. And it adds a nice yellow pop. So the most notable thing about it is that it is a strong androgen enhancer. Does that mean that people who are not desiring an increase in testosterone but are maybe looking for the vitality parts of it can take it? Yes. It is not going to be so much that it's going to throw off your hormone levels entirely. A lot of these like hormone supportive plants are really going to be more regulating than they are like increasing. So if you were assigned female at birth and you're considering taking pine pollen, there's a few things that you should note. It is going to increase sexual drive. It does this by increasing dopamine levels and energy levels. It is going to increase fertility rate. It's also going to increase sperm count. So these are just important things to be mindful of if taking it. Some people really enjoy those actions that they get from the pine pollen. So I take pine pollen, Francesco takes pine pollen. We absolutely love pine pollen. It does a lot of incredible things for the body. It is also an immune boosting herb. So pine pollen is really just kind of miraculous. Trying to think if there's any more things I want to say before moving on to maybe the tips. Maybe we'll come back to it if I do. I highly encourage that you use these tips. We made a long time ago on Patreon a pine oxymel together where we used pine tips, we used rose hips, a little bit of juniper, and tangerine peels. And the main purpose of that, oh, and maybe you tried it, we did have some for sale, our Foragers oxymel. The main actions of that oxymel was that it was a really vitamin C rich tonic, and that's what we really need right now. Not just with the coronavirus, but you know, with cold and flus, with the seasonal change, it's just something that we want to have on hand pretty much all the time the way things are looking. And vitamin C is one of the only things that we have seen that can truly combat this virus. So it's a good thing to have, it's a good thing to note. I would use this whole thing. I'm not necessarily going to cut away the needles. The needles have plenty of vitamin C to offer you as well. So just to kind of cover the basis, we're going to use the needles, the tips, and the pollen internally. You can use those externally too. My reason for mentioning this is because the bark and the saps are going to be usually used topically. The bark can be used internally with some precautions, but it's one of those things where it's extremely rich in tannins, so you want to be very careful when using it internally, and at that point there are many other things that offer what it does. So I would suggest sticking to using it externally unless you're really taking a deep dive into the uses and you feel confident ingesting it. That said, there's a lot of benefits to astringent, tannin-rich medicinals, similar to raspberry and blackberry. When you think about astringent that astringent action, what you should think about is tightening, contracting. And so we're typically going to be using these astringent herbs in the case of looseness. What's the right word for that? Relaxed. I'm still not thinking of the right word. It's a tissue state. Excitation and relaxation. Anyways, so a really great example of that is hemorrhoids. Any sort of situation where you have burst or loose blood vessels, you really want those astringent herbs to tighten them back up for you. What's another great example of astringent herbs is in the action of urinary tract infections of any kind. When you are excessively doing anything, excessively sweating, excessively urinating, excessively anything, right? That's typically going to be an indicator of a loose tissue state. And so ingesting or applying topically these strong, powerful astringent herbs is going to help contract, tighten up, and detox, which is really nice. So in our urinary tract infection tincture, we've got a lot of these astringent herbs that are both helping us to tighten and contract while also purifying, so that when we're eliminating those bacteria that are causing that in the first place. So this is pine. I would encourage you to really dive in. Pine is a wonderful medicinal that can be found everywhere, and as far as I know, every pine is medicinal. I want to say that if there was a pine that wasn't quite as strong, I do not believe that there is a pine that is toxic. I will make sure that I confirm that when I do the pine monograph for you all. But of course, just like anything else, I would encourage you to confirm identification of what type of pine you have before using it medicinally. All right. Now we are going to discuss the benefits of Japanese honeysuckle. There are quite a few different varieties of honeysuckle, and actually most of them are medicinal. There are some that are not, and there are toxic properties to honeysuckle, so please confirm your identity and make sure that it is one of the ones that fits in the medicinal category that has a low enough amount of toxin to use in that way. Even the Japanese honeysuckle here, though very medicinal, has some toxic properties to it. And this is something that you're going to see pop up a lot in herbal studies. There are several mushrooms and plants out there that do have toxic properties, but it's a very low level, or we can lower the level through certain things like heat or alcohol. So just make sure that you always look into that. This is one of them. Elderberry and poke are other good examples. So this is not going to have as much toxic activity as elderberry and poke, but it does have mild toxic properties, particularly in the fruit before the flower and in the vine. But those are some of the strongest parts of it as well. So really all you need to do is make sure that you simmer it, you heat it at a low temperature. This is typically done by either making a syrup or a dual extraction, and then you'll be good. So honeysuckle is a very prized medicinal in traditional Chinese medicine, and that is going to be specifically for its energetics. It is a very interesting herb for that reason. Though it is not necessarily a cooling herb, it has an affinity for clearing heat in the body. So this is particularly good for making sure you're safely detoxing the liver and the spleen, also the lungs. And that's what we're going to be focusing on here, is honeysuckle as a respiratory herb. That's what it's being used for right now in our sort of coronavirus focused releases that we've been having. It's in both our antiviral elixir and our respiratory elixir. It is an anti-inflammatory, anti-spasmodic, antiviral respiratory herb. And its anti-inflammatory properties are really important right now, because specifically what we're seeing with this virus is swelling of the small airways after building up a thick wall of mucus. So even after you've thinned the mucus and you're ready to have a productive cough, if those small airways are swollen, that's going to really hold you back from having that productive cough. So we really want to focus on herbs like honeysuckle and forsythia that not only help thin the mucus and have those expectorant properties, but they also have those specific anti-inflammatory actions to the small airways. So this is a really good one to know right now. I really like to get it when it's like this before they have opened up their blooms, but the blooms are absolutely medicinal as well. So if this is what yours are looking like right now, go ahead and use those too, that's fine. And also, if yours have no buds on them at all and you're just starting to notice the vine coming up, you can absolutely use that as well. This entire plant is medicinal. So let's move right over here to wild blackberry. And I'm going to show you another one because this is a pretty odd looking one. But since it is right here, we may as well go over it. So let's see how much you can see of it. I will also show you throughout the season when it begins to flower what that looks like. But let me get you close enough to see these little buds. Ow! And the leaf shape here. So hopefully you can see those little buds on the tip. That is actually not where the fruit is going to come out. These have a beautiful white bloom that happens first. There you go. There's some more. And those are medicinal as well. Actually, this is the time that I collect raspberry leaves, is before and when it flowers, and definitely before it fruits. You can use it after it fruits, but you do not want to use it. What was I trying to say? Sorry, I just forgot if I said raspberry or blackberry. They're both very similar, and here in Tennessee we have black raspberry. So just to confirm, because now I can't remember which one I said, this is blackberry. I will show you a black raspberry too. So, and they have very similar properties. So if you have one or the other, don't worry too much about it. They're really going to do the same. Wild black raspberry and cultivated varieties of raspberry have more of an affinity for the female organs, but both of them do have that affinity, and they will work in very similar ways. Especially the wild blackberry. Wild blackberry is not too far from wild black raspberry. Reason being, the cultivars of blackberry and raspberry have been produced to create these very separate fruits, whereas the wild varieties, the fruits are almost interchangeable. They taste very similar, they look very similar, and now in stores, the raspberries are soft and fluffy, and the blackberries are harder and juicy, firmer. And wild, they look almost the exact same. So just something to keep in mind. But yes, this is when I would use both the raspberry and blackberry, is before the flower, before the fruit. And what I was saying before I got wildly distracted is that you can absolutely use the leaves after its fruit, but I would not tincture them at that point. I would throw them into teas. And if you are using it postpartum and you are relying on it for its medicinal actions, I would not rely on it after it's fruited, because they've gotten much weaker. And actually, I will be posting soon, probably before you even watch this video, a little drawing that I had of someone make for me, because it's how I'm always describing when to know how to know when to harvest. And so how to know is, in the beginning of spring, we see these leaves come out on the raspberries, right? And the blackberries. And then we'll start to see the flower buds, and then we'll see the flowers, then the flowers will die, and then we'll see the fruits, and then the fruits will die, and then this whole thing goes dormant. So how to know when to harvest? The medicinal properties are going to be the most concentrated on whichever part of the plant it is working on producing. So in the spring, the leaves are going to be the strongest. Late spring, early summer, when we start to see those flowers, the flowers are going to have the strongest properties. Then when those die and the fruit is forming, all of its might is in that fruit, trying to make the best, juiciest fruit ever, so that people and birds can take the seeds near and far. And so that's how you know. So anyways, talking about wild blackberry and wild black raspberry. The most important thing to note about them that gives them all of their actions is the strong tannin-rich astringent properties. This is my top choice for astringents. This is in our UTI formula, and it is also in a topical spray for hemorrhoids, burst blood vessels, and spider veins. So really, 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 really nice tonifying, tightening astringent herb. And tonifying is another important thing to note about it. It's not just going to contract and constrict and tighten blood vessels and skin tissues, it's also going to tone them. And that's really important in the long term. So this is also one of the most powerful yet gentle astringents. Some of them, like agrimony, can be a little bit too much, so much that they can cause irritation to the issue that you're trying to help in the first place. So this is going to be a bitter herb. I really enjoy this in teas because it's going to have that same sort of tartness as a raspberry or a blackberry, but if we're using just the leaves, it's going to be much lighter. But still, if you're using it in a tea with, say, I typically pair it with goldenrod. Goldenrod doesn't have too much of a flavor, so this is going to balance it out by giving it a little bit of that tartness. So I love using raspberry and blackberry leaves in teas, though I do tincture them as well. Similar to other astringent herbs that we've gone over before, they have really wonderful diuretic properties, meaning while they're helping to constrict and contract, they're also making sure that they're purifying and detoxing as well. And typically, other than childbirth and post-childbirth, typically our tissues are contracting because they're fighting something. So having a purifying, tightening herb is really nice. This is a wonderful tonic herb for both child labor and post-birth because it's really going to help tighten up the pelvic floor. It's incredible for that. I could go into some stories about women that I've worked with who have had pelvic floor injuries, who have had issues with tearing, and raspberry is one of the most incredible and quickest, but also gentle herbs to use in this case. So this truly is one of my top used, is the blackberry and black raspberry. I really do use them pretty interchangeably. We have both on our property. I will say one difference about them is that you can most commonly find blackberry leaves in smoking blends, and that is because they do have somewhat of an affinity for the lungs as well. So let me see if I can just happen to find a better looking one to show you guys. There is so much honeysuckle. It's incredible. And I've also seen so much elder this year. And I mentioned this in a post, but I'm telling you what, every time Francesco and Augustine and I go out walking and we see all of this elder, so much more that we've seen in previous years, all either of us can really say is just how incredible it is that nature always provides and always knows exactly what we need. And in a time where, as a collective whole, the whole universe is experiencing this virus, having this strong, powerful antiviral just popping up everywhere is truly remarkable. So here's a very nice patch of wild blackberry. Want to make sure you can see that real nice. It's pretty easy to identify. It's got very intense thorns. One thing I love about the older plants is that they will get, oops, sorry, I got caught. They will get these very red stems, and you can actually do some herbal dyeing with these stems. Very pretty. And I feel like they taste like that color looks. All right, more soon. I am here right now with some red clover. This is a cultivated variety that my friends Harpeth Moon Farm grow as a cover crop. So it is going to look a little bit different than what you see at home. I'll be sure to also post a photo or video of what red clover growing wild looks like. Ours actually hasn't come up yet, but I am seeing it in other parts of the country and the world. It will look very similar in that it's got your classic clover leaves, 3 to 4, sometimes 5, and it's got that classic clover look, but these cultivated varieties are a little bit bigger and a little bit darker than what we see wild. But they've got the same medicinal properties, so I absolutely love to glean this cover crop when they're done with it. This is another herb that I really enjoy. It's a wonderful tea herb, and it is something that I gift every Mother's Day to the mothers in my life. And typically you will start to see it growing around Mother's Day in May, so that's a really good indicator of when to look out for it. With us getting these earlier and earlier springs and warmer days, we will probably start to see it in late April. This is a really wonderful herb for menopause. That is going to be the first and strongest thing that I note about it. It of course has lots of other medicinal properties, but that is what it's most used for, and that's where it really shows up strong as a wonderful ally. And that's because red clover contains phytoestrogen, which sort of replicates estrogen, and therefore it can be really wonderful for relieving some menopause symptoms such as hot flashes. I personally have endometriosis and enjoy the way red clover makes me feel, but it having those estrogen compounds, it is a little bit controversial about whether or not people with estrogen dominance benefit from it or if it irritates it. So if you're super estrogen high, that might be something to look out for, is to maybe try it in tea a few times before you decide to enjoy it regular. It is a tonic herb, so if it does work for you, it is something that can be taken regularly, and a lot of it. It is a cooling, lymphatic supporting, cleansing tonic herb. So we see a lot of this category, and this is something I went over heavily in the last video in regards to chickweed and violet. Trying to think, there's one more. Cleavers. Chickweed, cleavers, and violet and red clover share a lot of the same properties in that they're cooling, they're gentle, they're wonderful for just breaking up stagnancies, helping to increase lymphatic flow, and to be mildly detoxing to the lymph system. And that's what we really need right now. So this is an incredible herb to use as soon as it's ready for us to use it. Personally, I don't tincture red clover. I don't think that it is strong enough and doesn't have enough alcohol soluble properties. So this is something that I just put in lots of teas. It's wonderful in tea, and it really does shine in teas. Oh, sorry, got a wasp friend here. Red clover does also have lots of wonderful topical uses. Trying to remember the name of this compound. Oh, okay, so it's got a ton of anti-inflammatory compounds, but it also has silicic acid. So where this really shines topically, it's going to be great for burns, it's going to be great for bruising, scraping, but where it really shines is in the case of eczema or psoriasis or rashes in general. And that's because silicic acid has this action that's just very, what's the right word? It's mildly drying, but luckily this is a moistening herb, so it's a good balance. But silicic acid really helps to sort of draw out and tighten things. So when we think about puffy, irritated eczema, psoriasis, and rashes of any kind, first of all, having something cooling and moistening is wonderful. And having something cooling and moistening with that silicic acid content to really help cleanse that rash up and just really dry it up, this is going to be a remarkable thing to put in eczema and psoriasis salves. I also use a lot of chickweed and violet topically for those same purposes. So having either a lymphatic oil or salve around that can be used for certain things like massaging the breasts, massaging under the armpits, around the neck when you're sick, but it's also something that you're going to want to use in the case of rashes, eczema, and psoriasis. So really great springtime salve recipe to make is going to be the chickweed, violet, red clover, and yeah. So yeah, this is red clover. She's also pretty tasty. Alright, I'm going to do one more quick video before I leave my friend's beautiful farm. I do have my truck going in the background, so I hope that's not too loud. But I wanted to go over flea bane. This right here is common flea bane. The most identifiable trait about flea bane is that it has these stringy petals. It's pretty easy to identify. It's in the aster family, so it's got these very aster-like leaves in the strong, hairy stem. And flea bane is most noted for its ability to stop bleeding. And it's got very powerful properties to stop internal bleeding. And the cool thing about this plant is it's entirely medicinal. We can use the flowers, the leaves, the stalk. We can even use the roots. It generally grows in these little clusters, so I could walk around to all these different clusters here. And how it works for bleeding is because it also has astringent properties, something that's coming up a lot right now. And an herbalist that I admire very much, Leah Larabelle of High Garden, shares a beautiful story about flea bane. You all might have heard my personal story about saving my dog Maybelle's life with goldenrod and raspberry leaf and cleavers. Well, this is a similar story for Leah, but in regards to flea bane. She had a dog who was sick. They took her to the vet. The vet said that she was bleeding internally and didn't have much longer to make it. And Leah started making an infusion of the flea bane and putting it in her dog's water. And they were able to keep her dog, that the vet had given a few weeks to live, alive for another year. And it's just a really beautiful, powerful herb. This is another one that we find a lot of history about when we research, being used in wars and countries where there wasn't a ton of access at the time to medical tents and physicians, so people were having to grab from the field what they could. And flea bane was absolutely one of those that was used for packing into wounds, but also for making those strong infusions to help stop internal bleeding. And plantain and flea bane are both herbs that I really love to talk to children about, because they're what I call playground herbs. And what I mean by that is they can be found anywhere and everywhere. And they're very gentle. They're very safe herbs to use. So I just love to teach children about them, because then anywhere they go, they see them, they know what they do, and they're proud to share that knowledge. Not to mention that distracting upset children is the #1 thing to get them to stop being upset. One day, Augustine was in 1st grade, this was a long time ago, and there was a little girl who fell off the monkey bars, and she was screaming and crying and wailing. And Augustine went and found some flea bane and plantain and brought them to her and said, "Here, I'll make a poultice for you." And the girl was so curious about what he was doing and holding that she completely stopped crying. So I'm gonna also show you some plantain right here. And this is, they have narrow leaf plantain. So there's quite a few different plantain varieties. And just keep in mind, this is only one of them. And this is the narrow leaf variety. I'm not sure how well you can see here, but it's gonna be this leaf right here, with the very strong lines and indentions going down it. That's very specific to the narrow leaf plantain. And it's called narrow leaf because it has these long, narrow leaves, whereas the typical, more common plantain has more of a teardrop shape. Imagine like a kitten paw. And plantain and flea bane are both wound healing herbs. Plantain is one of my favorites and probably also one of my most used plants. And just like flea bane, you can make an infusion from it, you can chew it up, apply it directly to the wound, make a poultice from it. You can infuse it into an oil if you'd like, which is what we typically do with plantain. But what I love about plantain is how fast it works. It is a very cooling, soothing plant. It is wonderful for poison ivy, bug bites, tick bites, itches, rashes, scrapes, burns, cuts. It is very moistening and cooling, so it's just going to feel soothing immediately to all of those types of injuries. But it also has properties that help speed up the recovery of wounds and injuries as well. So flea bane and plantain are some very important ones to know and to teach any children that you might be around about.